Hello everyone, welcome to Inconvenient Truth. I'm your host, Jennifer Zeng. Recently, Newsweek magazine published an exclusive investigation saying that it has identified 600 US groups linked to the Chinese Communist Party influence effort with a vision beyond the election. Actually, for many Chinese Americans, it is not news at all. We knew it many years ago and lived through the experiences of being targeted if you are not in the CCP's ranks. Today, I will share with you an astonishing fact that a piece of legislation at the state level in Oregon that affects all the public schools was virtually pushed through by the CCP 10 years ago, but local residents had no knowledge of such a law at all, but are still bearing the consequences today. This fact was discovered and broke by me 2 years ago. Before we start our story, please subscribe to my channel or make sure you are still subscribed. These days, with all the major social media platforms all acting as internet police, it is not easy for individuals like me to get my voice out, so I need your support as much as possible. Now, let's go to our story today. It all started with an unexpected email. In September 2018, an American Chinese lady in Oregon suddenly received an invitation from an unknown source to an event in downtown Portland to welcome China's new Consul General Wang Donghua to Oregon. This lady was very much surprised for two reasons. First, although she is of Chinese ethnicity, she has not been involved in any China-related events or deal with any people in the Chinese community for decades. She was very surprised that such an invitation could actually reach her. Secondly, the wording and implication of the invitation made her very uneasy. One of the sentences said, with US President Donald Trump threatening to implement $200 billion in additional tariffs on Chinese goods, the people of our two countries face a major escalation in trade tensions. She's very much aware that Oregon is an agricultural state and China is Oregon's largest export market. If the new Chinese Consul General wanted to work people up to go against President Trump's trade policy, he could have a bigger audience in Oregon. As the midterm elections were close, after reading the invitation carefully, she came to the conclusion that the new Consul General of the People's Republic of China in San Francisco would not only be inciting the local business community to oppose President Trump's trade policy, but also try to influence the election. So that's why she felt alarmed. So she did some research about the host organization of the event, which was the Oregon-China Sister State Relations Council. Let's call it Oregon-China Council for short from now on. And the following was what she found. 1. The president of the Oregon-China Council is a very high-profile Chinese man called Lan Jing. He is also the principal of a business consultant company called Octasias. Many big names can be found on his company's latest news page, such as Oregon Speaker of the House Tina Kotek, Vice Premier Liu Yandong of China, and so on. 2. Further search with Lan Jing's Chinese name led to numerous reports in Chinese. One report was an exclusive interview from the CCP's most important propaganda outlet, the People's Daily. This means that Lan Jing is a darling of the CCP. 3. According to People's Daily, Lan Jing is also an overseas observer representative of the first session of the 12th National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. If you are familiar with Chinese politics, you will know that the CCP's Political Consultative Conference is a very important organization, and its main function is to carry out the so-called United Front work for the CCP. What is United Front work? A U.S. government report defines it as, quote, the agency responsible for coordinating the CCP's influence operations mostly focuses on the management of potential opposition groups inside China, but it also has an important foreign influence mission, unquote. The U.S. government report gives reference to Liu Yandong multiple times as Council of Confucius Institute Quarters Chair, former State Council Vice Premier, former Politburo Standing Committee member, former United Front Work Department Minister. On the homepage of the Oregon-China Council we mentioned earlier, a photo of Lan Jing and a smiling Liu Yandong is featured as a lead photo. By the way, the website of the Oregon-China Council has now been taken down. I don't know when it was taken down, so all the images you are seeing are archived files I saved 2 years ago when I did the investigation. Why did I save those pages? I knew they could be deleted at any time. Although 2 years ago, Lan Jing still had his website on as an asset to show how capable he was. I knew he would change his mind later. I knew how things would develop much earlier than him. Don't ask me why. That's my secret. Anyway, on his company website, Lan Jing lists the following as one of his main achievements. Quote, in 2011, Lan Jing facilitated the Honorable Madam Liu Yandong, the State Council of China, to visit Oregon. She is the highest Chinese official ever to visit the state of Oregon in history. Unquote. So, from this we can establish that if Lan Jing could facilitate as high-profile a figure as Liu Yandong to visit Oregon, he must either have a very close personal relationship with Liu or be a core member of the CCP's United Front Work Department. So, how did Lan Jing do his United Front work in the US? Another People's Daily report on November 19, 2015, entitled U.S. Oregon Politicians Discuss How to Enhance Relations with China, has this paragraph, quote, according to Lan Jing's introduction, the Legislative Assembly of the State of Oregon passed legislation in 2010 to have public schools in Oregon set up Chinese language courses and Confucius classrooms to promote Chinese language study. This was the first in the United States or even in all the English-speaking countries globally. This initiative was first introduced to the Legislative Assembly by the Joint Committee on Fujian Sister State, unquote. Lan Jing's own website also listed the following as his milestones, quote, the first Confucius classroom in North or South America established in Medford, Oregon as St. Mary High School in 2008. Oregon was the first state in the U.S. to pass legislation to expand Mandarin education in all public schools in 2010, unquote. With these first starters, dozens of Confucius institutes and Confucius classrooms sprang up in Oregon. Portland State University alone had 36 affiliated Confucius classrooms in 2018 and still has 33 now. And if you check the name list of the Joint Committee of Fujian Sister State, which first introduced to the Legislative Assembly the legislation to promote Confucius classroom, you will find that Zeng is the executive director of the committee. Judging from the surnames, you can see that apart from Zeng, there are 6 other Chinese members out of 18 members. So the Joint Committee has nearly 40% Chinese members. I don't think we need to do any introduction for the Confucius classrooms here. The US government already defined the Confucius Institute in the United States as an entity advancing Beijing's global propaganda and malign influence and required it to register as a foreign mission. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also said that he was hopeful that the Chinese Confucius Institute cultural centers on U.S. university campuses would all be shut down by the end of the year. Back in 2018, when I investigated the case in Oregon, I interviewed the late Denise Richardson, Secretary of State of Oregon, and asked him what Zeng's role and responsibilities were in the Joint Committee on Fujian Sister State, but Richardson declined to comment and asked me to talk directly with Mr. Zeng regarding any questions about his participation and activities. I did manage to reach Zeng via his phone. However, as soon as he heard who I was, he immediately hung up without giving me any chance to ask any questions. Senator Bestie Johnson, one of the 2 lawmakers of the Joint Committee on Fujian Sister State, who was still in office 2 years ago, confirmed to me that Dennis Richardson was the main one who had worked hard and traveled to Fujian province in China many times to push things forward. So, to sum the story up, a CCP darling, Mr. Zeng, was the executive director of the committee of the Oregon Legislative Assembly that introduced and pushed through the legislation to promote Confucius classrooms in all state public schools. When I talked to the lady who received that unexpected email and then contacted me so that I could do some investigation, she said she was quite alarmed to find out that such a law, so obviously backed and pushed by the CCP, could be quietly passed in the state legislature. In other words, how deeply has the CCP been influencing American laws and politics in a broader spectrum? If people like Zeng are allowed to have a say in the process of forming new legislation, isn't that a loophole in the US legislative system? Another fact that saddens her is, although she has been a local resident for many years, she knew nothing at all about this law, nor any English reports about the passage of this legislation could be found anywhere in the US when she searched for them. Instead, she only found this news on the websites of the Chinese embassy and Hanban. They proudly posted the news there as their achievements. By the way, Hanban is a Chinese term meaning Office of the Chinese Language. It is also known as the Confucius Institute headquarters. According to its official website, Hanban is a public institution affiliated with the Chinese Ministry of Education, and is committed to providing Chinese language and cultural teaching resources and services worldwide. When you hear this story, do you feel alarmed as well? The public schools of an entire state were invaded by the CCP's Confucius classrooms, yet local residents knew nothing of it and are still sending their children to those schools today. Digging further, we found more alarming information awaiting us. When the Oregon lady who tipped me off read the Oregon China Council's website, she felt that it was a completely Chinese site, although the language is in English. Most news reports on the website were Chinese language reports from People's Daily and Xinhua, and much to her astonishment, she found that the registered agent of the Oregon China Council was not Lan Jing, but Dennis Richardson. Under the photo stories of the Oregon China Council's website, a lot of happy photos of a smiling Richardson could be seen, featuring him leading a trade delegation to China in 2017. This lady also found that this trip was partly paid by the CCP. As reported by the Oregonian, a daily newspaper in Portland, and according to Richardson himself, because our Chinese hosts value family participation, 2 of my grandsons were accompanying me at their own expenses. Actually, entertaining visiting politicians is the CCP's standard practice. In my last program, I talked about how I learned a lot of insider stories from Chen Yonglin, former First Secretary of the Chinese Consulate in Sydney, who defected to Australia in 2005. Chen Yonglin said the CCP invites politicians to China, treating them like kings, sometimes entertaining them with prostitutes, and giving benefits to their family members. Chen Yonglin revealed that in 2005, the Chinese consulate in Sydney alone had given a dozen so-called scholarships to Australian officials' relatives who wanted to study Chinese in China. For example, once a child of Henry Zeng, former member of the New South Wales Legislative Council of Australia, wanted to go to China to study. The Chinese consulate in Sydney immediately gave him a scholarship with both tuition fees and living expenses covered for free. During the exclusive interview with the People's Daily, when asked about how improved relationships with the American people, Lan Jing winks his eyes and suggests the simplest way is to get to know an American friend, the kind that can be put onto your emergency contact list. It was quite obvious that Richardson was exactly such a friend for Lan Jing, who had spent at least 15 or 20 years developing their relationships. Although Richardson passed away in 2019, I wonder how many other politicians are also on Lan Jing's emergency contact list. I also learned from Chen Guangcheng, a Chinese civil rights activist who lived in Washington, D.C. now, that the CCP has been spending $200 million each year in Washington, D.C. alone to bribe politicians. So, from this single one story, we can see that the CCP's penetration has been way deeper and broader than many people's widest imagination. Well, I broke the story of Oregon 2 years ago, but it seems that not that many people were paying attention then, so I'm speaking about it again today. I hope this time more people will listen. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. Truth does save lives. Please subscribe to my channel, spread it, leave your comment, and check out my other videos. Thank you. See you next time.